strengths. And so where I'm new to the county, I'm not new to this discussion in space, but I am looking forward to learning alongside with all of you guys. My top 5 strengths in the spirit of kicking this off are communication, connectedness, woo, activator, and developer. And without further ado, I would like to pass it off to our panel to do introductions. Bill, can you handle the first introduction, please?
It would help if I came off mute. Hi, my name is Bill Rodgers. I am a IT division manager with the IT department. I am the division manager for central services and imaging operations. My top 5 strengths are futuristic, empathy, positivity, connectedness, and strategic. I put strategic at the end because I recently retook the strength stuff, and strategic dropped 2 places, so I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Bill. And how about you, Chela?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chela Guzmán-Wiegert. I'm the Assistant County Administrator for Law, Safety, Justice. And my top 5 strengths are responsibility, achiever, arranger, learner, and context.
Thank you very much, Chela. And how about you, Kristy? We'll have you go ahead and do your introduction next.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Kristy Morter. I'm the Assistant Director for the Public Works Transportation Operations Division, or actually Operations Department, sorry. And my top 5 strengths are relator, responsibility, arranger, achiever, and analytical. I just noticed I have 3 of the same ones in the executing category as Chela.
Thanks so much, Kristy. And last but certainly not least, Richard, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Webb. I use he, series pronouns, and I currently work in Human Services Public Health within Internal Services as one of 2 equity navigators.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to our panelists for those great introductions. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. Panelists, we'll actually rotate through in alphabetical order by first name, and then everybody will have a chance to rotate and answer a question first. So with that, we will start off with B for Bill, and we will have you take our first question, which is, why do you believe being a strengths-based leader is so important?
So from my perspective, I think, first of all, leading with strengths are my strengths, and being a strengths-based leader is important because my strengths are probably the thing that got me to be a leader in the first place. And so being focused on those things that made me stand out, that somebody would consider me for a leadership position when I interviewed, and then also being able to be effective as a leader. The second thing that I think comes with strength-based leadership is taking the time to know the strengths of those people who report directly to you, and even if you can go down a level or 2 as well to know the strengths. It helps you prepare the message, especially if you're in a situation where you've got a couple of maximizers on your team and they really want you to make that meeting a 15-minute meeting versus people who want to do a little bit more ideation and they want that meeting to extend, so you know how to balance the messaging when you're having those meetings with staff.
Thank you very much, Bill. And Chela, next, same question for you.
So I think Bill knocked it out of the park. I agree with him. A lot of our strengths are probably what got us to where we are, but leadership happens at many different levels. We all are leaders. So when I think about an effective leader is someone who not only understands people's roles and functions and the expectations that go around them, they also have the ability to set goals and outcomes, which Bill talked about. We got to know how to do that. But the best leaders are those that also appreciate the strengths of their colleagues, the people they work with, to understand their talents, their abilities, their strengths, and then to set those teams up in ways that get us to achieve those outcomes or goals. And so where I see successful leadership, it is where we can really focus on the independent or be able to identify the individual contributions that everyone can make. So although you heard my top 5, in my top 10, I have individualization. So you can kind of see that coming out. It's about figuring out every important part of everyone's gift, talent, strength to bring to a team. And I think that's where we're the most effective as leaders.
Thank you, Chela. Over to you, Kristy.
Thank you. I agree with everything both Chela and Bill said. Maybe what I would add on is I think when we lead with our strengths, generally we're more confident because it makes us better. And I think when you are confident in what you are doing, it also helps you be competent in your work as well, which I think having confidence and competent make you a very strong leader. I also think it helps build positive work culture as well when you're able to connect with your team and understand their strengths and make sure you're feeding into them as well as your own. So I think that also helps just build trust and positive work culture as well.
Thanks so much, Kristy. And how about you, Richard?
Thanks for this question. So I should have also communicated that my first 5 strengths are individualization, arranger, strategic, relator, and ideation. And so, I believe that being strengths-based, or I would maybe provide a slight reframe, a strengths-rooted leader plays out as a firm foundation to demonstrate competencies as a leader. For me as a leader, I've had the opportunity to center my strengths, to utilize them and demonstrate competencies like being resident focused, building trust and demonstrating integrity, with my team, and colleagues, and really live into the vision for my service area, and the county to act with purpose in all that I do each day. Being rooted in strengths invites me to focus on continuously improving and showing up as my better self to continually model mindsets and behaviors that can result in the elimination of disparities within the county by leading, living strengths, myself, and really being intentional about seeing and adapting, strengths to others as I become informed.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Richard. Hey, panel, if we are moving ahead at a good pace, I have a follow-up question for each of our questions, and these are voluntary. So if you're like, yeah, I don't got something to say, then that's cool, right? But if you do, then go ahead and unmute and weigh in. So here's a question. If you did not always believe that being a strengths-based leader was as important or not as important as you now do, what changed your view?
So it's a good question. I guess I reframed it a little bit in my brain. And that is, before I had awareness of the strengths, clearly my strength of individualization, I was constantly trying to figure out what made people tick and understand what they were good at. And then my arranger, I would try to position people in places and connect them for the biggest impact. I think there's a tendency, maybe I'm wrong, but there's a tendency for us sometimes to look at weaknesses, to look at the things you can't do, to think about, oh, I'm not good at that, they're not good at that, we can't do that. And when you frame it with strengths rooted perspective, we then are more positive, we're more hopeful. I think we can be more productive as people, as teams, as an organization. And so when I saw a language, a shared language we could use, then it grounded me and it won me over. It gave me a framework in which to see and interact with one another so that it wasn't, oh, I don't get along with that person. I think it was more so, oh, look, we see things through different lenses. Their strength is X, Y, and Z, and that's maybe my blind spot. That's why we might not be jiving. Or maybe we both are strong in this area, and that's where we could align ourselves for bigger impact. So that's how I would respond to that question. It's a great question, but it kind of got reframed in my head when I was thinking of the answer. Hope that's helpful.
And I'll maybe add on to that. I was just kind of thinking, so my 5 strengths, I don't have any in I think the influencing domain. But when I think about my strengths, I think I use the other 5 to help me influence, just through being able to relate to other people, using data to make logical decisions, and then executing on those decisions. And I think that then helps me to influence, even though maybe I don't have one of those in my top 5.
If I can add a +1, to that, I love everything that I've been hearing. I would add for me that it enabled me to not only pick up that language, but it validated, me, and, the experiences that I was having. I think, one thing, if I had to add a strength, I would, add the word investment, and so, strengths allowed me and invited me to invest in myself and validated, I would say, the idiosyncrasies that I was experiencing organizationally as I interacted with people, as I utilized different tools or, invited, different tools. And so I think just as Chela was saying, it provided a language for shared communication. But first and foremost, I think in some ways how I've experienced strengths is from an outside, inside, perspective. And, how I like to lead with strengths is from an inside, outside perspective. So it really started with validating me. It encouraged the investment that I had put in, not only to my studies, but, relationships, different, experiences. And then it allowed me to actually, see others in more effective ways. Really, invest in building effective bridging and those different type of things. So I think, I'll probably say in a little bit later, it's kind of a liberating tool. There's so much messaging that I've experienced in organizational culture that communicates what I'm not doing right, or what's not possible, or is utilized to maintain systems of status quo. And I think strengths is a wonderful tool to start breaking down those barriers internally, but then also externally as a part of a team or a part of an organization.
So before hearing about the strengths program, I had values, and I basically every year I looked at what were my big values, and the strengths program pretty much aligned to what I was calling my values before. So I just used the new framework, adopted the new language. I used my lifetime value has always been kindness, and well, that translates to empathy. There's another one that I called partnership, which translates to connectedness for me. And then there was one called strategic, which translates just to strategic. But this was something that was there all the time. And I think we probably all had all of these things all the time. We just have now a framework by which we can talk about it. And then also when we're talking to the people in our spheres, whether they be at the colleague level, our reports, the people who we report to, we have a way to identify with them. For example, I think one of David Huff's strengths is believer. When I understand that when he talks about something, I know that he's talking from a place of conviction. So that's something that helps me understand where he's coming from. Where sometimes when you hear a leader speaking, they are ideating in the moment, and you know that what they're saying right now may change because they are a good ideator, and I can trust the fact that ideation is going to lead me someplace.
Excellent answers. Thanks so much, panel. We will move on to question number 2. And Chela, we'll have you start with this one for us. How do you leverage your strengths to advance racial equity and reduce disparities?
So great question, Rob. Thank you for that. What I will say is some of the responses we just heard about kind of dovetail into my why, or how I leverage my strengths. Why is it important to advance racial equity and reduce disparities? Bill talked about how, one of David Huff's strengths is, the believing, and that he totally has thought about it and he is committed to that. And so when we think about our organization, each and every one of us are committed to what we understand to be a shared responsibility of advancing not only our decision making, so policies, our practices, the stuff we do. And we are committed that what we do and what we believe in and what we enforce and what we value, we promote equal access to not only opportunities, equal access to outcomes. We want all of our residents to thrive. We want each and every one of our colleagues to thrive. And so when I think about how my top 5 as listed kind of manifest in that effort, I leverage my responsibility as I drive with that. My words, my bond. I am committed. I feel compelled to fight to eliminate disparities, to champion racial equity, to continue to address the realities that we're experiencing, no matter where I'm at. Now I have to do that tactfully, right? And so I have to leverage my historical context. What got us here? And so that's the context in my strengths. And I like to, of course, I want to achieve it. I want us all to achieve it. So I have an inner drive to make sure that when we are addressing a policy, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that we are seeing it from all the very different perspectives of all the individuals I've met who have told me about their life experience or how this impacts them. And then I try to drive our team, my colleagues, our staff. We go together towards the goal of reducing disparities where we can, eliminating them, and then also making sure that we have racial equity at the forefront. Many of us have the same framework. We have the same questions that we can ask. The boldness, the responsibility comes out to ask them, not just internally, but externally. And I think where we can have those discussions, where we can listen and hear each other's strengths and how our commitments come out, our values, our talents come out as it relates to racial equity, we're better for it as an organization. So I'm extremely excited that we have this very specific value around racial equity, and we are driven every day by our goal to reduce disparities. And now to attach strengths to that, to have it in this question, I think, Rob, is a wonderful object lesson of where we are at as an organization. And now to put words to everything we're doing daily to meet these goals, where we're all leveraging our strengths. So just kind of in that sense, my sense of responsibility, what my role is currently, how do I advance and ensure that we reach this goal? How do I bring in the context, the historical context, the reasons why we're here? We can learn from that. How can I put language to it? Although not in my top 5, I do have communication later on in my top 10. And so I try to keep a mindset of what my role is currently and how I can use my strengths to get the conversation and action moving towards the goal.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chela. Panelists will continue to move in alphabetical order of first name. And so that means, Kristy, you are next with the same question.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm going to kind of focus on a specific example for this. So I've been helping lead the transportation domain work for a number of years. And about a year and a half ago, we were kind of asked to review the priorities and goals and, just kind of think about what is the story we want to tell with our work. And so clearly that's not something I want to decide on my own. So using my relator strength, I brought together a smaller group of people, because generally I tend to navigate through working with smaller groups to, develop some effective decision using that relator strength. So brought together some different folks with Public Works and the Digital Inclusion Office to kind of talk about our transportation domain goals. And really, were there any changes we wanted to make? And a lot of it was listening for me, just to kind of hear what the different staff members thought. And really what came out of that was connection. It was really the theme, how transportation at like the right of way, how we use the different infrastructure in our transportation right away to make connections, whether it's a road, a sidewalk, a transit route, or else even the fiber that's buried in our right away that can allow us to have this meeting today virtually. So really, the story that came out of that meeting was how transportation connects, and really all the connections with the other domains as well. So that was, the story we've been talking about the last few years. And I think actually last week, David Huff announced that I think we're changing the domain from transportation to connectivity. So that was interesting to hear. And, and I think it was directly related to this work that we did here at the county. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kristy. And over to you, Richard.
Thanks for this question. So for me, I leverage my strengths consistently as an equity navigator. First, I'd invite people to consider when it comes to race, equity and disparity reduction, that I don't perceive and experience the descriptors of strength in a universal way. Race impacts how my strengths emerge in the pursuit of racial equity and disparity reduction. They also carry different meanings for me based on my set of experiences of racial discrimination and racial breakthroughs. They don't show up in a linear order. So, as you read them as individualization, arranger, strategic, relator, ideation, based on my set of experiences, they actually intersect and emerge together based on context. Hello, Chela. Experience, and leaders that I'm engaging with. So leveraging my strengths and the way that I show up for myself, for my team, for my service area, really invites authentic relationship building. So I lead, especially as a newer person coming into the county, I lead with, individualization and relator. And so, as, we tackle together the realities, of racial equity, then, my strategic, and arranger, really kicks in. And so I invite, organic learning, strategic design, and focus on what's possible. So my ideation really, in a lot of ways, becomes very valued because I will be the person in the room that says, okay, here's the reality, here's the context, let's be strategic, but we can get it done. And so I really utilize and leverage my strengths, especially in relationship to racial, equity and eliminating disparities, in a way that individuals can, and I can model, confidence, competency, and a willingness to collaborate together in really organic and authentic ways, because I know that people have different experience in the racialization process.
Thanks so much, Richard. And we will close out this question with Bill.
So for me, my empathy strength shows up here, and it really ties into what Chela and Richard said about context. Leading with empathy really gets, and especially within a work setting, really gets into is what I'm doing really making a difference for the people that I'm doing it for? I need to take the time to take all my assumptions out of the equation. I need to be informed by data, but I also need to be informed by those people that I'm trying to serve, which means going out and having those organic conversations and taking the time to listen and to understand and then ask questions, take a note and mirror back what I've heard and said, did I get this right? And if I didn't get it right, to take the time to listen some more and keep working at it until I do get it right. When we design services, a lot of times I think we jump to that conclusion of what we think everybody wants, and we might be 60 to 70% along the way, but if we don't get to that maybe 85 to 95% fidelity, because maybe we can't take care of everybody all the time, but if we can bridge that gap to get into that place by listening, and that listening comes from a place of empathy. I think about how when I talk to my staff in the imaging group, we talk about some of the transportation issues. And one of the big things that I will talk to is that person who has to leave their house to walk a half a mile to get to a bus stop, to ride a bus for 45 minutes to get to a light rail, to get to a service center, to be able to do something, and all the waiting, and then the reverse trip on the way home. How can we design the service that we're offering from an imaging perspective to allow people not to have to do that? Can we save them that time? Can we give them that gift back? Is that the difference that and the only way we can get to that place was by initially taking the time to listen to the residents who were having those issues. And you get that feedback from the data and the information that is all over the county. And that's that place where we gain empathy to get to that place where we're actually designing something that makes a difference, as opposed to just making the assumption or jumping to the conclusion of, well, this will help. And our intent might be good, but unless we're taking the time to listen and gain that empathy, we're not necessarily going to get there. And that's how it shows up for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Panelists, we'll move on to our next question here. And the question is, how do you see your strengths come to life in your work? And Kristy, we'll have you start off this one for us.
So this one, I've got 3 executing strengths in my top 5. So I do tend to lead with executing strengths. So I value getting work done efficiently, and effectively. It's very important to me. So with those strengths, I tend to like to make lists to help prioritize my work, and it's rewarding when I can check something off my list. I'm sure many of you might have those strengths and do similar things, but that is something that does feel good. I think that is kind of connected to the responsibility and achiever strengths. But for me, it's also important to make sure people are feeling appreciated. So I kind of started putting together an end of year highlights and accomplishments list for our department to really kind of hone in on all the great work we've done over the years and make those connections to the county priorities of disparity reduction and climate action, innovation and workforce development. And for me, I think my executing strengths help me to develop that as a way of appreciating others. So that was just something I wanted to highlight from a work perspective.
Thank you, Kristy. And we will go over to Richard.
All right. Well, just as a reminder, I'm newer to the county. I think I'm a little over 5 months in. And so when you look at my first 5, I've been really leaning into my relator and then my individualization. And so, I'm entering, into the county, into, multiple cultures in my service area and then the county overall. And so I've been really leaning into others, trying to build authentic relationships, trying to really investigate what are they good at. And so oftentimes, I am wondering like, hey, I'm complimenting you, on, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. And so sometimes I wonder, how people are taking that, because they're just like, this person just got here. How do you know, what I'm gifted and talented at? And I'm like, well, that's one of my core strengths. Actually, my number 1 is that individualization, where I am experiencing the uniqueness in terms of how it may show up in relationship to how you perform your duties, how you lead, even the backgrounds that you choose for your Zoom, or your teams. I'm a person who comes from Zoom, but for your team's background, just like I started off the conversation with Chris, I'm like, hey, your background is amazing. It matches what you're wearing. And so for me, that's where I'm at. I'm really trying to, work on, introducing myself, build, some relationships, finding out, what people are good at, demonstrating, active listening, and empathy, trying to understand, what's been the historical context, that happens in my service area, and really the strategic plan, of the county, and then planting seeds in really strategic and idealistic, ways.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I think we are going over to you, Bill.
Okay, so very similar to Richard, though I've been here for 12 years, so maybe a little bit difference as far as time, but I lean into my strengths. I also, and when I was listening to Richard, the thing that kept coming to my mind was this is like, to thy own self be true, or know thyself. And by knowing your strengths and knowing where you're at, and then also taking the time to know the strengths of the people around you, there's a little bit of empathy that goes into that as well. But you know how your strengths are going to manifest themselves at particular times. And you also know when to maybe dial down the strength a little bit. So positivity might not be the thing that people want to have first thing Monday morning. But it's something that you know exactly when and how to apply the strength at the appropriate time. For me, one of the things that shows up quite a bit, and like Kristy, I've got 3 strengths in the same area, but they're all relationship builder strengths. And so connectedness is one of those things where as people are talking, I'm always looking for, that matches that matches that. And, there's some magic happening here. And if I can get these 2 people together to start talking about something, I don't really need to be there. I don't need to be present, but I know that they've got common goals. They've got something common, and they can produce something magical together, because from a strategic perspective, they're both kind of pointing in the same direction. They've got some alignment there, and they're probably going to be able to help each other. And for me, that's where the leaning into your strengths and just trusting that something can happen here. A lot of times you see these great things that all you had to do is be the catalyst to something. By the way, the 3 of you, I've been taking notes as we've gone, because I'm like, that's a really good idea. And I want to apply that someplace else in what I'm doing day to day. So thank you for that as well. And I'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Bill. Chela, before we have you wrap up, I just want to connect. I have to jump in and say, Richard, identify with what you were saying, because I'm like 4 months, so I'm new with you, right? And so one of my top strengths is activator, and I can make a joke about it since it's mine. There's a fine line between being an activator and an agitator, right? Ask my husband. So I have been, as a new person, really leaning on one of my other strengths that's in my top 10, which is learner right now, to kind of take it all in before I move with that activator strength. So I think that kind of definitely fits in. And Chela, I'll have you finish us off with this question.
So thanks, Rob, and thanks for that insight as well. I think, it's been interesting I appreciate all of the comments that have been made and the reflections of colleagues here, because before we started this meeting, we were talking a bit about how some of our top 5s maybe had shifted or moved. And so I'm one of those, and maybe I'm not alone, you don't have to admit it, but I'm one of those people who have done the Strengths Finders at different times in my career. So I've done it 3 times, and my lineups are different, everybody. And so that's interesting. I think that what it supports is that we are complex and dynamic beings. And where we give attention and we do have some strengths, yes, but we have lots of strengths, and there are ways to calibrate it. So when I think about my current 5 listed here and how it shows up in my life at work, I will say that in my transition to more of an administrative role in leadership, I've had to really let's say, modify and calibrate my executing. Because if you see here, I have 3 executing themes, and then I have kind of 2 as it relates to the strategic thinking kind of. And so when you're someone who's leading and really high on execution, I had to recalibrate how I'm going to measure success. It's not me doing it. And as a leader, you can't, as an individual contributor, it's kind of easy to run yourself, or at least you can find patterns in yourself and you can make yourself be successful. But as a leader, and we're all leaders, it's important that we're paying attention also to our colleagues, to the people who are in our foxholes. We're all doing work together. And to really be able to understand what are the areas where I should focus, what are the levers that I can maybe move and pull, the relationships we can connect with to make this and make us more effective in what our goal is in achieving our goal. And so you're hearing a bit of my arranger coming out there. You're hearing, I really want to learn, and I really like by nature to figure out, how do I identify why are we here? What are the reasons that got us here? What are some of the certain things we need to keep doing to keep going forward? I enjoy learning. Learning is one of mine. And so I like to take in information and understand, okay, keep an open mind, but then also understand that with that flexibility and thinking in this role, sometimes people don't want to hear all of that. They want me to say, where are we going? Tell me where I need to go. Just tell me. And then I can do that, because it could give a mixed message that I'm not prioritizing things. Everything is important. I can learn everything individualization, right? And so it's important for us to know the strengths, to know how sometimes they're perceived when we're leaning in really heavy with them, and then to have that level of transparency with the team where they can say, oh, that's Chela's X strength coming out. And they can then point it out, and we have an ability to talk about it and keep moving forward towards that shared goal. And so I've talked a bit about learning. I've told you about my context before. I think my arranger, I really enjoy getting to know people one by one, learning more about them, figuring out what teams and collaborations, kind of like how Bill has talked about it. It manifests daily where I'm like, oh, being part of that team over there will help you to get that stuff done. If you just say this, it might get you there. And so it's fun to really bump into other people's strengths, because it'll help you to also identify where you're strong and then where you can lean on others where you might not be. And so it's really fun to have that transparency and that shared language. And I like learning about it. And so I appreciate you, Rob, also sharing kind of how it can, if you lean too heavy, what happens. Because we can poke fun, but it's so important for us when we're solving problems. So I agree with everything that's been said.
Thanks, Chela. Yeah, I would say, as long as I'm picking on myself, yeah, Bill, if you want, if you're not a morning person, don't get the woo guy on the Teams meeting. I'm that way even before I have coffee. So just fair warning, schedule me later. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to question number 4. What advice would you give to someone who is working towards becoming a strengths-based leader? And Richard, we'll let you start this one out for us.
Great. I am so happy to give the Hennepin Strengths announcement. So I would invite any person to receive this intentional nudge around possibility with strengths. As I talked about earlier, there's so much information and messaging currently, and maybe historically for participants, that your story communicates what you're not, why you're not, and forever what you won't be. And so leaning in and leading with your strengths can be one way that you can reclaim yourself, validate yourself, and unlock the possibilities and greatness you've always been holding. Utilizing this tool effectively provides a research, valid, and reliable way to communicate your awesomeness into your sphere of influence and beyond. Lastly, if you've heard of the concept, pay it forward, becoming a strengths-based or rooted leader invites you to pay it now, pay it forward, and not shortchange residents, your team, or others in your life that have been waiting and wanting you to show up.
Thank you, Richard. Bill, are you ready to follow that one?
No, because that was awesome. I mean, Richard, thank you for that. So I will go back to what I was going to say here. And two things that come to mind here. in preparing to become a strength-based leader is also taking that time to understand we are part of a bigger group. And this is where my connectedness steps in. And it is important for you to show up and lean into being a strengths-based leader or to be a leader. It's also very important for you to know when to step aside and let somebody else step in and lead and be part of that leadership. And so this is kind of that we lift each other, we help each other move along, we support each other, and to be in that place and that mindset that leadership is also helping others lead, helping others do, whether that be as an individual contributor, as a leader of a team, or as the leader of a department, or an ACA, but we're all in this together, and remember to help others come along the journey with you.
Another excellent answer. Thanks, Bill. And over to you, Chela.
So, Rob, I think what we heard Richard and Bill say, a word comes to me, it's called invest. We invest in things that we value. And so, as Richard said, by you investing in you, an individual, figuring out what makes you tick, what are your strengths, how do they manifest in a given day? By investing in you, you then increase the likelihood that you're going to spend time with those you can partner with, your colleagues. And you'll get to invest to understand how their strengths manifest in them. And then guess what? When we start making partnerships and working as a team, we build a stronger organization. And we can build a culture where we're talking about the positives. And we might have things in common, but we're still unique, complex, dynamic, ever-changing people. And so I think that it really is important for us to invest, because when we invest in us, when we invest in others, when we invest in the organization as a whole, we can show up better for our residents so that they can also come to understand who they are, that we can speak to them in terms that we see positives and strengths and hope coming from them. They might not see it, but if we can interact with them with that lens, then we're better at succeeding as a society. And so it's worth the investment. It's some work though. There's a lot of information out there, but you have to be willing to go in and really look at yourself and see how you change and grow as you spend time on you as an individual, and then you interacting with others and larger groups. So it's all about that. I think we all want to succeed. We all want to thrive. We all want to feel valued and belong. And I think strengths and being rooted in our strengths as an organization and as individuals, we have a better sense of achieving our goals and being successful. So it's worth it. And I can't beat Richard's commercial. That was the message right there. But that's what I feel and think when I interact in these types of environments where we're talking about strengths.
Love it. And Kristy, can you wrap us up for this question?
Can you guys hear me okay? My connections. Okay.
Might be
Are you
crackling
guys
just a little.
able to hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be quick here. So for me, I guess my advice would be to know your strengths and how you want to use them, and maybe write down those ways you want to use them in your goals, and become aware of the areas of risks, kind of the balconies and basements of your strengths, and then give feedback on how you're using them, and then I think that'll help you develop effective leadership qualities.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kristy. Say, Chris Carter, I wanted to check in with you. I know that we've gotten through 4 of our 5 planned questions. Do you want to open it up to Q&A right now, or do you want us to go with question 5?
let's open it up to Q&A. I know there is one in the chat right now, and so I'll state that, and whoever is has an answer for that, feel free to speak up, and then we can have people raise hands. So the one question in the chat is, how can we let our strengths come to life during an interview, and how can we overcome the nerves? So any suggestions on that one?
I can provide some information on that.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I would recommend is, really doing your due diligence, for the interview or the position that you're going for. If it's internal, to Hennepin County, then you already know that, we are a strengths-based organization. And so I would read the job description and maybe look at your strengths and see if there's some words that provide synergy that you can communicate, in your interview. In relationship to nerves, that's where you can actually, that tells me there's opportunity to internalize your strengths. Know that you already got what it takes. You are already a gifted, a talented person, and that the position that you're actually, striving for is the one that you're supposed to be striving for right now. And so definitely leaning into your strengths and reinforcing that is a tremendous opportunity. And really it's I would invite you to just look in the mirror, maybe even put your strengths on the mirror and, really live into a mantra each day to say, here are my strengths. I'm going to live into them, and I'm going to, carry them, throughout my day in this interview process and, speak it into existence, live your strengths into existence. So I think there's a real opportunity to do that. But, I would invite you to be strategic internally to the organization. And if it happens to be externally to the organization, I would invite you to see if the organization and do a little investigation to see if they are actually a strengths-based organization. And so if they're not that way, you can do some introduction, but I would utilize words that are in synergy with the descriptions of your strengths.
So Josefina, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would just say, Josefina, what Richard has said, I totally agree with. What has worked for me on occasion, when you're thinking about the examples that you're going to reflect on, be it you can imagine that they might ask about a certain time where you had to achieve something with little direction or some kind of behavioral based question. Have your answers tied, you have your answer, and then look through the lens of strengths and attach what strength is kind of manifesting or showing up in the way you address that issue. Sometimes with nerves, the way you position your body helps. So it sounds a little funny, but try it. If you turn your toes in just a little, almost feels like you're overturning and you're kind of pigeon-toed, I guess is what it would be, right? Maybe, I think. So when you do that a little, it calms you down. It's just an old trick. I used to be a trial lawyer. So in the courtroom, you got to do a lot of little things that'll slow down the pace in your brain. And so sometimes if you just turn your toes in a little bit, that helps too. And it's just practice, to be honest. So I give you that. It might work, it might not. It has worked before. So, but I do think where you can really prepare, do your due diligence, as Richard said, but then also do it through the lens of how you might talk about how you do your work through strengths. I've seen it done at the end where people have said, and the additional thing I'd like you to know is these are my top 5 strengths. They show up in this way. So they've at least shared a bit about themselves in interviews. I kind of like it where you've tied it to how you've solved a problem in the past. It really resonated with me when it was done and when I was participating in an interview panel.
I was going to say that the fact that you got an interview, somewhere along the way, your strengths probably already showed up. And take a little bit of confidence out of that your strengths are showing up even on paper. And because it showed up on paper, make sure that becomes part of your interviewing process. I think Chela and Richard just said that as well, but that's but you've already proven your strengths to get the interview in the first place.
Awesome, thank you. One more question in the chat. Do your strengths show up differently in virtual spaces versus in person? Would like to
Yes.
speak to that. Okay.
Yes,
Tell us
absolutely.
how. Okay.
But I think they show up differently with each interaction you have, each meeting that you go to, whether that be in person or whether that be virtually. Every situation is a little bit different, and different strengths are going to show up at different times. Like I said earlier, I know I'm a morning person, and anybody who knows me, I'm a morning person. I'm up at 5 a.m. My dogs are like, "Yeah, let's go out," and that positivity comes out. But I know to turn that down. But I also know that on Monday morning, what people are looking for is probably a little bit of empathy. Hey, how was your weekend? Oh, that was, or, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But those are words that connect us to the people that we're working with, and make sure that those things are showing up, whether they be virtual or whether they be in person. These are the things that are going to show up, and each meeting is going to be a little bit different. So treat each encounter as its own, for lack of better words, as its own adventure, to make sure that things can progress exactly how you want them to, and in a positive way.
Any other tips for that one about strength showing up differently in virtual versus in person?
I would agree with that too. And sometimes I guess there's certain meetings that I prefer to have in person for different reasons. So sometimes I'm intentional on schedule an in-person meeting or just keep it virtual as well.
Thank you. That is all the questions in the chat. If there are further questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. We have a few more minutes left. If not, maybe we could do a quick last question and then wrap up.
All right, very good. We can just do a quick round robin here. So how does being strengths-based change how you interact with the world around you? And whichever of my esteemed colleagues wants to take that one first, please do.
To go quickly, and also I blame Chris Carter for this one, because I was working with her when the strengths program was introduced to me. This being strengths-based has taught me to be more patient and listen. It's actually, I feel, helped center me as far as how I live my life and interact with the people in the world around me.
For me, I think it helps me be more aware of other people's strengths as well. And maybe I'll need to approach a situation a little bit differently depending on what their strengths are versus mine. And a lot of times, this is probably even just related to how I interact with my kids, just kind of gauging, maybe how to approach a situation, just depending on how they're feeling at the time.
I guess I would leave people with the image of a stoplight. And so when it's green, that's when I'm bold with my strengths. When it's yellow, that's when I'm cautious with my strengths. And then when it's red, that's when I stop and reflect with my strengths.
I love that visual, and what has been said resonates with me. I think we have although we might have different strengths, we use similar strategies when interacting in our world. And so I appreciate the positive lens that I think strengths rooted perspective brings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to Rob, our moderator, and our panelists for sharing your stories and helping all of us understand a little bit more about strengths and how they show up for you and how they make you successful. In the chat, I put a short survey. If you wouldn't mind taking that, we would love to get your feedback. We had a great turnout today, so I appreciate everyone coming. Feel free to check out and show up at the rest of our events this week. We have balconies and basements tomorrow. Kristy, thanks for that plug. Wednesday, we have all of our events at Southdale Library. We would love to see you in person for that. So calling all our woos and connectedness and relators that want to see people in person. And then strengths and resilience, or from burnout to resilience class Thursday, and then a brand new class on Friday, connecting your passion to purpose. So I'm very excited about that. So any last comments from the panelists or Rob? Otherwise, thank you so much.
I would just like to close with a big thank you to both Chris and her full Strength Suite Planning Committee. You guys have put together just a wonderful array of experiences for us, honoring the different strengths of our team. So thank you all that have worked on that, and I hope you guys all take advantage. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.